everyone, you're just listening to another episode of the Fire These Times, and I'm Ayoub, your host today. This will be another monologue, which means I am pacing around, which means you will hear stuff from my surroundings. Hopefully nothing too annoying because this mic is pretty decent. I decided to record this because, well, I already did two of those, so why not do a third one? And people have been reacting positively to them. It seems to be meeting some kind of need, so I feel kind of compelled in a sense to do this, and also it's helping me think through certain things, so win-win, I guess. I'm sitting in my garden now in Brighton in the UK where I live. The weather is quite nice. It's a bit chilly but not too bad, and I'm able to do some work on my laptop, except when I have to pause it to do monologue. And there's this airplane or airplanes, I don't know, flying above us. It's not unusual. It's either an NHS something or whatever, maybe some private aircraft. Gatwick Airport is not too far, so at times we just see them as well, but usually you don't hear them. And this one, or these ones, I don't know if it's one or more, we've been hearing them. And I start feeling extremely anxious. I can't quite describe it. It's like in my bones. Like, I tense up. Rationally, I know that I'm safe. Nothing's gonna happen, or whatever. But it's like, it's there. So what I do in those moments is I go for a walk. I try and distract myself. Maybe I put on a podcast. I sit outside when I can. I started watching TNG, Star Trek The Next Generation, which, alongside DS9, Deep Space Nine, for those who know, are my kind of two comfort places, if that makes sense. It's where I go when I want to feel more comfortable, especially those two, but Star Trek in general, Voyager as well to some extent. And I'm watching The Measure of a Man, which is this episode where Data, the android, there's like this entire thing about whether Data is sentient or not. And it's one of the most moving episodes. It's one that I've seen definitely more than any of the other episodes of TNG, and easily 10 times now. I don't know. I just watch it regularly. Like every now and then I would just put it on. It has a bit of that, for those who know 12 Angry Men, kind of that vibe where it's just like there's a court case and they're debating things, and it's very philosophical as well. And anyway, I'm making myself think about this question of sentience and a fictional universe in the future where there's an android and stuff like that, because that feels easier than thinking about the year 2026 in the context of my country of Lebanon being bombed by the Israelis. Today is what's the date today? The 18th of March 2026. Last night was very difficult for my friends in Beirut. The Israelis leveled an entire building in Bashura, which is in central Beirut. They've struck Zar al-Blat. They've been bombing non-stop Dahiyeh, South Lebanon, East Lebanon, and other parts of Lebanon. Unless I'm mistaken, and I may well be, because they bomb so much, I think this is the first building that they've leveled in central Beirut outside of Dahiyeh. They've been leveling buildings in Dahiyeh virtually every day. And friends of mine, at like 1 a.m. here, which would have been like 3 a.m. in Lebanon, were still awake. I decided to go to sleep at around 1 a.m. here in the UK. I can't sleep these days very well, so I took a couple of melatonin just to ease my my sleep. And I slept okay. My toddler woke us up a couple of times. That's not like unusual. And I woke up with this huge back pain, which I do think is also psychosomatic, but in any case. I then start my day. Now as I'm recording, it's 10:30 a.m. local time. As I said, I've been sitting outside and I'm going to start my work, and I've recently started a job with the encyclopedia lead as encyclopedia lead. I think my first step would need to be to learn how to pronounce encyclopedia. It's very difficult for me. At the Decolonial Center, which is very exciting, and I'm really looking forward to doing this. And I'll talk about this some other time more in detail, but for now it is what it is. And I feel this urge to do this now, a monologue. So I paused my regular work. I'm doing this. We'll edit it, upload it, and then hopefully kind of forget about it for a bit while I go back to regular work. The reason I did this is because the plane was above me, and I thought, okay, I need to talk about it now because apparently I do. My cousin, who is 15 soon, so was born in 2011, asked us on like the family group if this war will last longer than 2006, which was kind of the last big war. If you don't include 2024, because there are so many of them, so you have to choose somehow. And I responded, I said, we don't know. Of course, we don't know, but likely. It's quite possible. I mean, last war in 2006 was like 33, 34 days. I was 15 at the time. This one has already been lasting 3 weeks. If you include when they really started, which was in 2024, and so obviously it's much longer than a month. But this latest iteration, because that's how we count things now. It's like that's how we count things. Our criteria, the comparisons that we use, is not like compared to having a normal life. How can we weather this? There is no conceptualization of a normal life. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't make sense, and it follows us around. I'm here, as I said, since 2020, when I was in Lebanon for a few months in between things, for like a good 6-7 months. And then I left again. That was in 2019, which is why I took part in the uprising at the time in October. And then I left again in February 2020. And then obviously, basically 5 minutes later, it was the COVID pandemic. So amazing timing for me to travel. And we stayed in Switzerland. That's where we were living at the time, and we got stuck there. And I remember very well, like August 2020, the 4th of August, of course, was the day we moved to a new flat. Me and my partner at the time. And that day, of course, was when the Port of Beirut explosion happened. That was shocking, horrifying, and everything you can think of. Certainly very confusing and just horrifying, as I said. And then horror got replaced with disgust and anger at the government and so on. And I was able to sort of do what I do in those situations, which is like I put my analytical hat on, historian hat on, try and understand what happened, why this happened, this and then, and so on and so forth. And that was kind of it in a sense. I did episodes on the Far East Time, spoke with Lina Munzer, my good friend, who I think will come back at some point or soon enough here as well, because she's in Beirut, and she was there also during the explosion, and just to talk, let her kind of let it out and vent. And in Arabic we have this expression called fashit khulq, which I don't know how to translate it, but like letting off steam, I guess. I don't know. That was kind of it. So I thought at the time, August 2020. But then, as I soon learned in the, I don't know, 2-3 years following that, add that to the trauma that was COVID itself and everything that we went through, obviously as a world at the time, which for most people, I don't need to explain what that was like. I realized that I was actually still struggling with thinking about what happened on that date, on August the 4th. And it was also at least like in part because I wasn't there. And so I had no way really to process it. Obviously, I'm not saying it would have been better for me to be there, of course not. But I had no way to process it. I didn't quite know what to do with that information. Friends sent me videos, photos. A lot of good friends would tell me stuff like this place that we used to hang out was destroyed. This place is shutting down because it was already struggling because of the economic crisis that was worsened by COVID, and so on and so forth. And I was sort of able to have some kind of mental map, you might say. But it wasn't until 2022, I'm going to say, I don't actually remember. I went there for a few days for a friend's wedding, and I got to see the port of Beirut, what was left of it. By then, certain things were already rebuilt. At the very least, the debris and whatnot was swiped away and stuff. So of course, it wasn't even the same. But I got a sense of like, this is what I knew of what Lebanon was is just gone. And so it was like in some ways it was like a bit of closure in my head, but also not quite, because these things are not quite that simple or satisfying by any means. But it was like, okay, well, at least I saw it. And I went back home. At the time, we were living, as I said, in Switzerland. And it took me some time, because that's how I do things. I don't realize it immediately. I maybe feel it physically more, and I'm not like in tune enough with my body to quite understand what is actually going on. But then with time, like, this delayed reaction, I started feeling the horror of it all more. I started like being more jumpy around sounds, loud sounds, which I was never a fan of anyway. And I was reminded in the year 2020, let's say, no, as I said, after the wedding, so 2022, 23, something like that, that I had never really gotten over even seeing that video, those videos of August the 4th. And it was also, at least in large part, because I had not gotten over 2006, the war of 2006, which I wasn't in the places that were being bombed. I wasn't in Dahi, I wasn't even in Beirut. I wasn't in the south, I wasn't in the east, where the Israelis were focusing their usual savagery, and that's the same places for the most part where they're also destroying as I'm recording this. There've been, as I said, strikes all night. That building that was leveled in central Beirut, and just non-stop. They issued another evacuation notice for the city of Sur. In Arabic we call it Sur, Tir or Tyre. I don't know how to pronounce it in English. One of the oldest cities in the world, by the way, by quite a big margin. And so yeah, it's been non-stop, and I realized a few years ago that I hadn't really got over 2006. And now I went back to Lebanon in this past December again for a few days because my grandma has been sick. And I already talked about this in an article on my newsletter Hauntologies, on getting quote unquote used to the Israeli drone is what I call how I like this is the title, because I was there, and of course, as I said, by then the Israelis had been bombarding Lebanon for a year despite the so-called ceasefire, which I'm not going to get into again because there's never really been a ceasefire, as the Israelis have violated it at least, I said last time, at least 10,000 times. It's now virtually confirmed that the number is closer to 15,000 between roughly 2024 and the beginning of 2026. So I had, of course, seen videos, and friends would send me whatever, of the drones. That incessant noise, buzzing, very loud above you at all times. Most of the time you don't see it, at times you do. And it's there, night, day, sunny, cloudy, it's just there. The main weather, like the time when it's less likely to be there, is when the weather is really bad and it's really rainy and whatnot, and that's kind of a blessing. The horrible weather means probably less war. Good weather means more war. The Israelis don't let us even have the sky. We can't trust the sky. So I was there in December, as I said, for a few days. I got to hear the Israeli drone and didn't know quite what to do with that information. I posted about it, not to other Lebanese, because they all knew. And by it's not just Lebanese, people in Lebanon in general, residents of Lebanon, if you want. Obviously, the non-Lebanese also experience this. But it was like to the wider world, kind of this endless need to document what's happening, because it may make a difference, even though it probably doesn't. But it might, and that's better than not doing anything. And so that's why I do it. That's why I would do this monologue. That's why I would write about it. That's why I would go on not shows, like panels and workshops and interviewing, going on like various podcasts and being interviewed in different media outlets and whatnot. This wasn't really my dream as a kid. It wasn't like, you don't grow up thinking you're going to commentate about the destruction of your country to largely Westerners and hope for the best, I wanted to be a vet, I think, at the time, and then I decided to be a writer, which I am doing, so that's that. The topics I wish would be different, but to quote our friend, the wise Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, when Frodo tells him he wished this didn't happen to him, he wished the ring had never gotten to him, had never got, Gandalf tells him, so do all who wish to see such times, but that is not up for them to decide. What's up for them to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you. I think that's the exact quote. I could be wrong, more or less. And I do believe this. It's not like I'm not lamenting my personal fate. I'm just kind of at times reflecting how cruelly absurd it all is, more than anything. So I went in December of 2025 for a few days, and I experienced the drone. And I realized now, nearly 4 months later, that it's still in my body, that sensation of the drone. And as I said, I don't live in Beirut, and when you're outside of Beirut, or rather where I live in Mount Lebanon, like my family home, you don't hear it as much. Occasionally you do, but not as much. And so when I did hear it was when I went to Beirut, and I think so in total 2 times, 3 times maybe. And that was enough for me 4 months later to have this current reaction. Because I'm not reacting to 2024. Sorry, I wasn't even there. Like 2025 rather, December. I'm not reacting to 2020, the Polar Beirut explosion, because I wasn't there. I'm reacting to 2006, when I was 15 years old. And 2005, for that matter, when I was 14 years old, when the Prime Minister was assassinated in this massive car bomb by the Syrian regime at the time in Lebanon, the Prime Minister of Lebanon. And I was close to one car bomb that killed a journalist, the one that killed Gibran Twaini, which would have been, I think, in December of 2005. I could be wrong, something like that. I was like 2-3 cars behind it, or 4 cars rather behind it, with a friend of mine. Nothing happened to me physically, but you can imagine the sound, the shock, especially at the time where I didn't quite understand what was happening. So all of that is like in me, it's in my body. I can't quite do anything about it. It's just there. And last year, I think I did this episode with my friend Justin Salhani, who's a journalist in Beirut and who does a lot of stuff for from the Periphery Media Collective as well. I'll probably have him on as well soon, because he's been reporting on what's happening. And the episode was called "We Are the Children of War." And that's the theme I've been picking up in my class. I'm gonna now talk about it briefly, because now we started class last Saturday, and in 2 weeks I think is when I'm going to talk about, or 3 weeks I don't remember, is when I'm going to talk about this very topic. We are the children of war, which is very, I don't know how to describe how timely it is, and how, strategically very good for a class that this is so topical, and yet it feels horrible because of the nature of this topic, right? I'll put links in the show notes for those who want to sign up to the May class, by the way, because I already started registrations. But enough on that for now. And in that episode, We Are the Children of War, we talked about, as you might expect, us being the children of our parents who went through the war. الحرب الأهلية, the civil war, الأحداث, the events. I.e., of course, 1975 to 1990, that 15-year period. That's, my parents were 15 when it started, and they were 30 when it ended, and they were 31 when they had me. And in Justin's case, they were a few years older than that, but more or less same timeline. They never got over it, because how could they? There never was a process to. It's not like everyone got therapists, or there was group community. There was in some cases, and there were artists doing this and whatever, but it wasn't like this national thing. In fact, the opposite happened, as those who have listened to this podcast before know. In the sense that the crimes were erased with the amnesty law, and most people who suffered were just never got any accountability, any justice out of it whatsoever. And as a result, as again, maybe those who are very familiar with my work by now, including the last episode before this one, hauntings started happening. These ghosts, political ghosts, that we ought to take very seriously. And those ghosts are haunting Lebanon, haunting us. Those ghosts are not just even only the victims of the Israelis or the Syrian regime, but also victims of Lebanese factions. There's just so many ghosts, and if only they were talking to one another, one can only imagine what they're saying. But what about today, and the present, and also the future even? If that episode was titled "We Are the Children of War," is that even the end of it? Because technically, I'm the child of children of war. You can add one more layer to that, because my grandparents also fled war. My grandfather, of course, and my grandmother both fled the Nakba when they were children. That's a war. That's mass violence. Many of them of that generation experienced multiple conflicts and wars and ethnic cleansings and so on since 1948, which never really stopped then. That's why, like in a recent interview, or rather, I was quoted in an article that Justin actually wrote for Al Jazeera. I talked about the Nakba as being a continuous event, an ongoing event. It's not. I'm not the first person to say this. Many have said this. Many Palestinians have said this. It's not like new, but it's really important to think about it this way: that it didn't stop. It didn't end just because time passed. That's not how these things work. Otherwise, why would Armenians still be talking about the Armenian genocide over a century later? There's a reason. Turkey has never acknowledged what they did. There hasn't really been any process of truth and reconciliation, compensation, land back, anything really. So it's there. It's like a wound that festers. Or again, to use that same metaphor that I'll be using a billion times as yet in the future, unfortunately, they've become ghosts, hauntings, specters, the undead. And Lebanon's that. My grandparents went through this. My great-grandparents, I don't know the story as much, but I know that there has been like mass migration in the 1800s when there was a great famine in Lebanon that affected my lineage, like my family. I don't have any details, just very likely because like a third of the population died at a time. And on my mother's side, my grandfather, Jose, the name, he is very Spanish, right? Was born in Buenos Aires, and his father had moved at the time. There was, again, as I said, a huge wave of migration, which is why I am a citizen of Argentina. There's been constant migrations in my family, which is completely the norm. I don't know anyone who's Lebanese or Palestinian, for that matter, who doesn't have that history. And I guess I'm trying to just reflect on like what does it even mean? What does that look like? What does it feel like? And I can only describe what it feels like for me and what I think it feels like for friends of mine and people that I read, because I try and be attentive. And to be honest, it's similar enough. It's never identical. Everyone's different, but like it's similar enough that I can explain it well enough. I mean, let's say, with the caveat that I'm certainly missing certain things. But then, if that episode should be like the "We are the children of war" should be then expanded, and actually we are the children of the children of the children of war, and maybe one more: we are the children of the children of the children of the children of the children. Did I forget one generation of war? Probably further back to at some point maybe you stop. I don't know. Further back as of the 1800s, I don't know much about my own personal family history, but one might imagine. But I have a kid. She was born about a week after October 7th, 2023. Had written at the time an article a few months later, a year later, I think, October 2024. And the article was called "My Child is the Age of the Gaza Genocide." So my kid, who's Palestinian as well, through me, her great-grandfather, which she never met because he died in 2020, and her great-grandmother, who she hasn't met yet because my great-grandmother, my grandmother and her great-grandmother lives in Lebanon, and there's no safe way for us to go there right now, maybe ever. I don't know, because my grandmother is 90 years old almost, so I don't know whether they will ever meet. But she, like my kids, my daughter, now has a father who is a child of war, and has a grandmother and a grandfather who are children of war, and has a great-grandmother. She's the only one left of my grandparents who is also a child of war. So what's happening to all of these children as they grow up? Where do these things go? These hauntings, these political ghosts, where do they go? Of course, this is generalization. Some people will, go through them, process them, whatever it might be. But I'm talking in general, structurally, if you want. And so I'm thinking again of my cousin who wasn't alive in 2006. He was minus 5 years old. He would be born in 2011, as I said. And asking us on the family group, like, is this going to last longer than 2006? This thing that he heard about from us, or I don't know, in the news or online. And we had to tell him, I said, we don't know, but probably. It's better to expect it to last a bit longer rather than always hoping that it's going to end today and it's going to end today and it just doesn't. Until it does, everything has an end. And of course, then the question is, what kind of end? Because this is going to be an Israeli end. An Israeli end, again, for those who know everything I've said, written so far, or have seen or read this elsewhere, because this is not rocket science, and I'm certainly not the only one saying this. Anyone who has experienced this, who has experienced Israeli violence and is like remotely analytical can tell you this. Is analytical the right term? I'm not sure. Like you can read Mahmoud Darwish witnessing the siege of Beirut in 1982, and what he's telling you at the time is not that different from what I'm saying here. I actually also reflected on this in a kind of this short article, I don't know, 2 years ago on Hauntologies called "The Madness They Suffer From," because that's a quote by Darwish, who was writing at the time during the siege of Beirut, and I think he was in Beirut if I remember correctly. And the madness that he's referring to was this. I'll explain it briefly because it's very relevant. He knew, like, Mahmoud Darwish was born in Palestine, and of course then became, he wasn't among those who was forced out, so he became an Israeli citizen. So he knew Hebrew from a young age. He spoke Hebrew fluently. And he had Israeli friends, progressives, who, of course, they would converse in Hebrew. And so Mahmoud Darwish could read Hebrew newspapers and whatnot. And he realized that his Israeli friends and colleagues, or maybe more acquaintances, rather, in those cases, wouldn't believe anything even that he was telling them. They needed, this way he was describing, like they needed some confirmation from their side, from the Israeli side, which wasn't usually on its way because Israel has military censorship when it comes to its actions against us. I wonder if everyone who's listening to this even knew this, that Israel has military censorship. As in literally, you're not allowed, there's like gag laws. You're not allowed to report on a lot of the things that the Israeli army is doing, which is why if you read a lot of Israeli news, it's like just basically, it's almost like reading a PR statement from the IDF itself. There's a reason for that. Other than they are, for the most part, ideologically aligned with the IDF anyway, but even if they weren't, they wouldn't have much of an option. With some exceptions, of course, 972 Mag being the one I contribute to, and it's the one that I highly recommend, and it's the one that I just last week published also an article on the war, and in which I argued that Israel's goal in Lebanon is to destroy Lebanon. It's not about Hezbollah. It really isn't. It's to destroy Lebanon itself. But to go back to Darwish, he described this phenomenon of his colleagues or whatever Hebrew-speaking folks as going through like a form of madness that they suffer from because they won't believe their own eyes. Even like there are some of them who were in Lebanon, who were even embedded with the army, and there still some of them wouldn't believe what they're seeing until it's sort of like retold, repackaged in some kind of official capacity. And he described this, as I said, Mahmoud Darwish, as madness. I think that's important. I know there's in this, as a parenthesis, this entire conversation about like the way words are used in terms of like mental health, and it's not necessarily healthy, and I know it can be problematic, but just forgive me for using these terms in this case because generally I don't know what else to use, because it does feel like a form of madness. And it's the same situation today, 40 years on. Actors have changed. Hezbollah didn't even exist in 1982. It was formed in 1982 technically, but really in around 84, 85, in response to the Israeli occupation of South Lebanon. The same South Lebanon that the Israelis are currently working to occupy again. So my kid is the child of a child of children, and maybe one more, of children of war. And we, as me and my partner, who's not Lebanese, have said, like, it ends with us. This cycle of violence ends with us. But of course, we can't control it. We can control elements of this. Like, we can, at the very least, be open and talk about it and have this relationship of trust with our child and do our best. But my kid is my kid. And I am who I am. And I'm the son of these people who are themselves the children of those people. And that's what we went through. And that's what we're still going through for the most part. Those of us who are still alive. It's going to be impossible for my kid not to know this. In fact, I don't want her not to know this. I don't think it will be good for her not to know this, because if anything, she'll just want to know it anyway at some point with fewer tools than if I just talk to her about it, which I will at some point. She's just too young now. And so, after recording this, I'm going to go back to my desk, well, not quite a desk, whatever, outside in the garden, and try and do some work. And in the meantime, this will be released in the wild. People will listen to it. Some of them will gain some comfort from it. Others may not. I don't know. I hope it does. Because there is this need, whether you're in Lebanon or not, whether you're just someone. I have lots of friends who have no connection to Lebanon, have never been there, but only either just because they know me or they know some other person who's Lebanese, or of course they know Palestinians who have been going through much worse for much longer, and so on and so forth. Also feel something like this. You can call it like secondhand trauma or whatever, I don't know. Not that dissimilar from me reacting to the airplane above me, but 1 degree removed maybe. But it doesn't mean that it's not. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you're neither Lebanese nor Palestinian, or you're not connected to Lebanon, but you are in this indirect way because you know people who are, and you start feeling bad. What I've experienced is that people who feel this almost feel like apologetic. Like I have no right to feel this. This isn't about me. And of course, I'm not saying make it about you, but it isn't valid to feel this because it means you're still a human. And there's a part of you that knows that this is just fucked up, that it doesn't matter. The details don't matter. It doesn't matter what the politics of the situation is. That's a distraction. That's a way of just getting us bogged down in details and debating who started this and who didn't. And although I can tell you in all the confidence of a historian who's been doing this for a long time, that it is very clear that Israel started this multiple times. Even if they didn't. Even in the case of Hezbollah joining after October 7th, for example, which in this case Hezbollah is the one that started technically, the response is their decision. It's their choice. They are the ones that developed the Dahi doctrine. They're the ones that committed and are committing a genocide in Gaza. These are choices. These are political choices, military choices. No one is forcing them to do this. I talked about this kid, Muhammad, a Syrian refugee in Lebanon who witnessed his 5 members of his family killed in the previous monologue. That kid has nothing to do with Hezbollah, has nothing to do. In fact, his family was a victim of the Assad regime that was backed by Hezbollah. He was just there. The Israelis decided there was now the time of death, the location of death. And that's the only reason he is now going to be haunted by his own family for the rest of his life. That's the only reason. Someone in Israel made that decision, or someone in Israel decided to give that power to an AI. Very likely ChatGPT at this point, who knows? And the AI made quote unquote a decision. So now you add this extra layer of meaninglessness. It's not even someone maybe who decided that you're dead or your mom's dead. It's just an AI. It's meaningless. And at some point, probably AIs will collapse as an industry, not as a tool, but as an industry the way we know it today, because it's completely unsustainable and it's a bubble. And then what will all of this have been for? How can you reconcile the death of your mom in these horrific conditions with the meaninglessness of what killed her? Just because someone largely in America or in London or whatever is making some money out of it. Not because of an ism, not because of Islamism, or even not because even of Zionism technically. Although it does go back to that when it comes to Israel, but in terms of the immediacy of it, it's even more banal than that. And that's something that I really, really struggled with. So, I'm going to now go back to try and do some work. Try and keep my head clear as much as I can, try and stay sober, so to speak, not kind of lose it. Not that I'm not letting myself feel anything, but just because there is also such a thing as feeling too much. Especially in a context like this where ultimately I can't do anything about it other than talk about it and write about it. Listen to people who are there and kind of retell those stories in this format or in writing. And that's kind of what I can do. So my kid is going to be the child of children, and so on and so on and so forth, of war. And I want to be even more specific than that. It's not just like war happens and we are victims of them. It's people making these decisions. And right now, the only reason I can, and I think people know this, that I'm not saying this because I have any sympathies with Hezbollah or whatever, but objectively, the only reason this devastation is ongoing. The only reason yesterday overnight the Israelis leveled an entire building, killing people in it, and destroyed multiple flats, including that of a professor at the American University of Beirut, professor of chemistry, who it took him 20 years of saving up and his wife 22 years of saving up in order to afford that flat that is now rubble. The only reason this is happening is because Israeli leaders have decided that this has to continue. The only reason this is happening is because Americans are letting them. The only reason this is happening is because the West, broadly speaking, with some exceptions like Spain, has decided that people like me, like my friends, like my cousin, like that kid Muhammad, the Syrian refugee kid, like that ayoub professor, they have simply decided that we are worthless. It doesn't matter whether the Israelis bomb us today or whether they don't. That's the only reason this is happening. Forget about the Strait of Hormuz, forget about the Ayatollah, forget about any of this. It was a decision to start this war. The longer this continues, the harder it will be to end it. That's why it's so urgent to simply end it and force an ending. And I don't see any way this will happen unless one of two things happens. Trump decides so, because this is the world we live in right now, where the Americans can just decide that. Or there is such a backlash against the war, especially against Israel, that they have no option other than to withdraw. Israel gets to participate in FIFA. Israel participated in the Winter Olympics. Israel is participating in Eurovision. Israel gets to be at various arm fairs. Israeli ambassadors are still in Europe. Israeli citizens with their passports can travel when we can't. They can go to Europe on a visa. We don't have that luxury. Those who only have the Lebanese passport, and imagine those who don't even have that because they are stateless Palestinians. My grandmother, as I said, 89, going on 90 soon, in a year or so. She's 89 now. If I want to bring her here in the UK, there is literally nothing I can do about it. Not only because I'm not a British citizen, and even then it would be quasi-impossible, but because there is no mechanism in the UK for bringing your grandma and saving your grandma. Because as far as the UK is concerned, your grandma is sick and therefore will be a drain on our precious resources. Those same resources that the British elites have been privatizing and largely sending off to like other elites elsewhere for like decades now. There's nothing I can do to save my grandmother, and I don't know if I can even express what that feels like. What I'm hoping for is that she is 89, she's very ill, and that basically she passes away in her sleep. I'm hoping that my grandmother dies. Like, what does that do to one's psyche? I can barely explain it. I can barely understand it myself, like explain it to myself, so that's why I won't be able to give you a good answer. It's nothing good. I can promise you that. Nothing good. That's something I can guarantee. And it's nowhere near an exception. Most people in Lebanon don't have the correct papers. They don't have like a Western nationality or some passport that allows them to travel. Most people in Lebanon are just Lebanese. And most people in Lebanon don't have the means in the first place. That I do. They don't even have those. So who's going to save them? And yet what do we see? What are the reports that we see? You open the BBC now, you open the CNN, you open the Guardian. It's not that you're going to see pro-Israel statements in terms of like Israel bombing a building and the BBC saying, yay, this is good. It's not like that blatant. That's for that kind of beautiful language you have to turn on like Fox News or whatever. But it's like in many ways just as insidious in many cases. I would say though the Guardian's recent coverage that I've seen has been pretty decent. But as a general rule, not like to name specific papers or anything like that. You won't see it like that, but you will see it almost like misleadingly contextualized. As though like this is just the latest war in the Middle East. That's what you would see. Crisis in the Middle East, war in the Middle East, war, Iranian war, and the kind of the ripple effect, whatever terms they use, shockwaves that are affecting Lebanon as though this was just like an earthquake that hit Iran, and Lebanon being not that close, by the way, but like let's say close enough, is still feeling the tremors or whatever. But that's not what's happening. What is happening is an Israeli state that has been long captured by an ultra-nationalist and often fascistic ideology, opening fire, dropping bombs, using AI to kill people. That is what's happening. Those same technologies, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's Palantir, those same companies, are headquarters in the West. Palantir is building a huge headquarters here in the UK. Those are the same companies. And Israel cannot do anything without those companies. Israel cannot do apartheid in the West Bank and settler colonialism in the West Bank and genocide in Gaza and ecocide and herbicide and ethnic cleansing in Lebanon. Can't do any of that without your Amazon Web Services or without Google. It doesn't have the infrastructure to do it without those companies. And where are those companies? They're not in Tel Aviv. Sure, they have headquarters there, but where are they based? In America, in Europe. That's where they're based. So our deaths, the horrors that are like raining down upon us and upon my friends and family are made possible by Western companies. So whose responsibility is that? Is it my cousin's responsibility, the one who was minus 5 years old when 2006 happens, and who now at the age of almost 15 is asking us like, how long will this last? His exams to do the brevet, which is this French exam, have been cancelled for the foreseeable future. The Lebanese ones have also been cancelled. Who's held accountable in all of this? The ICC has had an arrest warrant against Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant since 2024. Has France enforced it? Has Italy enforced it? They'll find loopholes, either diplomatic immunity or like they just tell Netanyahu not to come in French airspace. But you want me to believe that there's nothing that they can do about it? That they cannot shut down the Israeli embassy in Paris, in Rome, in London? That they cannot recall their ambassadors from Jerusalem or Tel Aviv? That they cannot condition the recognition of Israel on a recognition of either a Palestinian state or some kind of one-state solution? They cannot do that. Trump threatened Spain. And what did Spain suffer from exactly, other than what everyone else is suffering from anyway? Trump threatened to invade Greenland just like, a month ago? And we're all pretending here in Europe as though that didn't happen. Who's benefiting from all of this? I don't even think Europe is going to benefit from all of this. But I think there's a lot of cowardice in Europe. A lot of short-term thinking. And frankly, a lot of white supremacy and racism. This sort of idiotic ideologies that still festers in this continent, that makes a lot of people believe falsely that they're going to be safe from these fires and the fires that come after. And not to be too on the nose, but there is a reason why this podcast is called The Fire These Times. There is a reason for that. Baldwin, when he was talking about the fire next time, the title of his book, and if you watch that debate that he had with that idiot William Buckley in I think it was in Oxford in the 60s or something, he says towards like his concluding remarks, something along the lines of like those who are prevented from the American dream or banished from the American dream or something like this will wreck it, will destroy it, because they're being exploited in order to make that dream possible. And that dream can only exist if everyone is included in it, or it will constantly be threatened with destruction. And what usually has been happening, and this is not Baldwin, this is me now, hello. What usually happens is that instead of taking stock of why this dream, let's say, is being destroyed, what we do is we double down as a society. We look for the next thing and hope that this thing, especially if it's like a campaign of mass violence, like what the Israelis are doing, will somehow erase the previous thing. And I think this is part of the psyche where I described this yesterday I published this thing on Hauntologies as well, of like Israel's Lebanese ghosts. Like you can sort of take this, it's a very Baldwinian metaphor, but Baldwinian way of thinking. Take this and apply it to different contexts, with some nuances and differences here and there, but the logic remains the same. Europe right now is acting as though it can avoid the world that's been lit on fire by the Americans and Israelis without themselves taking any kind of action, none of which have to be military, by the way, it can be entirely peaceful, but any kind of actions towards the Americans and the Israelis. It's not going to be enough for the French to progressively move out of Zoom and do the French equivalent, whichever it is. That's not going to be enough. None of these things are going to be enough. Unless there is a conscious and active and even aggressive understanding that there is a reason why our world is on fire and that reason has to be tackled. I'm afraid to say, and I'm sorry to say, that this is nowhere near, this won't be anywhere near, the end. The last conflict. Let's say it stops now. Let's say they all agree on some kind of truce now, which, as I said, is what we need. It's not gonna guarantee that it won't happen again in a few months, in a few years. And whenever it happens, it's not that it just happens, but it happens with this added layer of more hatred, resentment, anger, trauma, and so on, built and grown in the meantime. This wound that keeps on festering, these political ghosts that keep on haunting us. Unless there is a conscious decision, confront them, to deal with them, to talk about them, to whatever, shine a light upon them, whatever it is, it will continue to happen. It will just continue to happen. And that is precisely, what is happening in Lebanon today. Lebanon is a small place. It tends to be underestimated. It tends to be misjudged. It tends to be overlooked. But it being small doesn't mean that the whole world isn't in it. The whole world is in it on account of Israel being in it. And Israel is backed by the West, especially the West, and India and the Gulf Arabs and so on. Although I don't know what's going to happen to the Abrahamic Accord, but that's a different thing for now. And as long as those Israeli backers, those backers of the State of Israel, do not understand that the fundamental problem that we all face, those of us who are pro-Ayatollah and anti-Ayatollah, those who are sympathetic with Hezbollah and those who are anti-Hezbollah, anyone in the region who has experienced this monstrosity in the moral sense, what Baldwin called a moral monster, which is the State of Israel in this case, we have no other path forward other than to resist, to remember, to go through, to process what's happening, to help out those of our loved ones who are still in that situation, and those of us who are not there to still go through and process these hauntings, this trauma, secondary or first-hand or all of the above, and continue until there is this recognition, this accountability, this lifting of the veil, the illusion that this can continue on forever and ever, and that the State of Israel can simply do what it is and can exist in this fashion as an ethno-supremacist, apartheid, fascistic, genocidal state. And that the hope that I think Europe still has is that these fires can be contained within the borders of historical Palestine, between the rivers and the sea, or maybe between the borders of the state of Lebanon, or maybe between the borders of the state of Syria, or now with Iran, between the borders of the state of Iran. But then what happens when those fires spread, which they absolutely will? It's not that long before it reaches Europe. It just isn't. And Europe will choose, probably, if I want to be a bit cynical about this, to kind of repeat the entire thing all over again. Unless there is enough of a momentum, enough of a whatever this is built up to change things. Don't let anyone, I'll stop on this point, and then I'll say a few words about the class. Don't let anyone tell you, and if this is one message I can leave everyone is this, don't let anyone tell you that this is inevitable. Don't let anyone convince you that this cannot be stopped. And don't let anyone persuade you that this is the only way things were going to happen, that they're going to happen, that this, in other words, was and is and will be inevitable. None of it is true. It's entirely bullshit. If there's one thing I've learned from being a historian, is that these human actions are human actions. Humans taking decisions, and other humans, for the most part, suffering the consequences for it. And that power dynamic, those who commit these crimes, who make these horrible decisions, or who believe themselves to be immune from the consequences, all they're doing is hoping, effectively, that the fires can be kept at bay, that the flood isn't coming, that they can just build higher dams and weaponize their borders more and more and build larger, taller fences with maybe killer robots and hope that this is what's going to save them, while at the same time having economies that depend on the rest of the world. Because we can't just turn back the clock, despite what many a fascist wants to believe. Okay, not quite the optimistic end of note to end on, I guess, but good enough for now, I suppose. So the class, for those who don't know, I'm giving this online class on modern Lebanese politics and history and politics, whatever, focusing on 75 onward, that civil war that I mentioned, but especially on 1990 onward, so basically the post-war, that quote-unquote post-war that I grew up in. And all of these, a lot of the topics, the themes that I've been discussing here in the previous monologues are themes that I also explore in that class. It's 5 weeks. This one, the March-April one, has already started, as I said. We already did one Saturday, and there's going to be another one. And I've already opened up registration, and there's already been a few people who have booked for the May class of 2026. There will also be classes after that, but the May one is the confirmed one. And it's very easy to remember because there are 5 Saturdays in May, and it's going to be all 5 Saturdays. Every Saturday of May from 4 to 6 p.m. If there are enough interest, I will also open up a time slot for Wednesday evenings, so maybe 6 to 8 p.m. UK time. I know it's going to be late for some people, but I can't do it before that. We'll see. If that interests you, let me know anyway. The way to contact me is in the show notes. It's as simple as sending me an email. You can be very informal. And the class itself is also informal. It's kind of like this podcast, to be honest. And when I have guests on, or when I do these monologues, this kind of informality is the same tone that I adopt during the class itself. And we talk about Lebanon as in its own terms, in a sense, obviously through my lens, and I do state my biases pretty clearly, that this is a way of understanding Lebanon, or ways of understanding Lebanon that could be different from other ways of understanding Lebanon. But I think the ways I understand Lebanon are valid, and I can explain why. And the hope is that I can both explain why Lebanon is very unique, but why it's also this, to quote myself here, painfully ordinary country, which refers to like this book review that I wrote in 2019 that I've mentioned a few times, Andrew Arsene's book, Lebanon, A Country in Fragments, which I also highly recommend. And as I said, registrations for May are already open. So if you're interested in taking that class very informally, I record everything on like audio recordings for those who can't attend every single session. The easiest way, the best way to express your interest, even if you don't want to commit yet, is to just send me an email or send me a message on Signal. Both of those are in the show notes. And let me know. We can discuss it very informally, as I said. Sorry, I think I said informally too many times. And then when or if you decide you want to take it, you can just book with the same link that's in the show notes. And voila, that's it. In April, I will send you everything. The syllabus, the Zoom link, the resources that you can use to both accompany the class, but also to just have with you forever. It will be a link on like a Google Drive link that everyone will have. And anyone who joins the class will also have a lifetime membership, like subscription of Hauntologies, my newsletter. So you don't have to pay extra for that, you just pay for the class. As well as like other things that I'm preparing. And yeah, on that note, as with last time, I will include links in the show notes for those of you who have disposable income and who want to spend it on like mutual aid initiatives in Lebanon, emergency relief and whatnot, which I of course encourage you to do if you can. And for those who have even more additional income, in which case alf mabruk, as we say in Arabic, like congratulations, 1,000 congratulations. And if you want to support me personally and the work I do, you can either do so with a one-off or a monthly donation on Ko-fi. The link is also in the show notes. Defy These Times is a member of the From the Periphery Media Collective. Check out our other podcasts such as Stir, Syria, The Inconvenient Revolution, the Mutual Aid Podcast, Hida, and Politically Depressed. All of those names are also in the show notes. And if you have even more additional income and you want to support us on Patreon, you can do so for as little as $5 a month. And this goes to the entire collective. We've been building it for like over a year now, and we're hoping that this is going to be a long-term project. All of us are doing this as like a part-time thing because, of course, we can't afford it, and we're basically mostly volunteering our time because it's also a labor of love. But we live in capitalism, which I think everyone knows this, and we also have to have these other considerations, despite it being always uncomfortable to do an entire monologue or whatever of an entire hour, and then at the end of it say, hey guys, can you send me money? It sucks. It is what it is. I'm trying to also get over it, like my ego, my pride or whatever, but it is what it is. All right, folks, all of the links, etc., in the show notes, and as always, take care.